She sat alone, forgotten by the world. The train hissed as it pulled away, leaving behind a swirl of dust, and her. Clara Jensen sat on a wooden crate, clutching a small carpetbag and staring at the empty tracks. Her hands trembled, not from the chill of the wind, but from fear. She'd traveled nearly 1,000 miles, all the way from Kansas, answering an ad from a lonely cowboy who wanted a bride. But now, standing alone in the middle of a forgotten station in the middle of nowhere, she realized the truth. He wasn't coming. People passed by, ranch hands, travelers, a man selling apples, but no one stopped. No one noticed the woman in the faded blue dress with a heart full of hope and no place to go. The train hissed like a snake retreating into the distance, trailing steam and sorrow as it disappeared over the horizon. It left behind nothing but dust, and her. Clara Jensen sat alone on a splintered wooden crate, the only seat in sight at the desolate station. Her fingers clutched a worn carpetbag with all she owned, one extra dress, a pair of boots too tight at the toes, a Bible with her mother's handwriting in the front, and a collection of letters from a man she had never met. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it wasn't the wind that made her shiver. It was fear. She had traveled nearly 1,000 miles by rail, leaving behind the only life she'd ever known in Kansas, a life that was little more than empty rooms, silent dinners, and a future already dried up before it had ever begun. She came here because of an ad in a newspaper. A few lines of black ink that had changed everything. Lonely rancher seeks kind-hearted woman for marriage. Must be willing to work and build a life together. No lies. No games. Just truth and a fresh start. W.T. Boone, Cypress Ridge. She'd read it again and again until she knew it by heart. She'd written to him, poured out her hopes on paper, and he had answered. His letters were honest, even tender. They spoke of wide skies and quiet evenings, of a porch that faced the sunset, and a cabin that needed a woman's touch. He said he would be waiting at the station. But now, the platform was nearly empty, and the man with the warm words and the big dreams was nowhere in sight. The sun was slipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows that made the station seem even more lonesome. The telegraph office had already gone dark. The station master, a grizzled man with a limp and a watch he checked too often, gave her a pitying glance every now and then but said nothing. Clara's heart beat like a hammer inside her chest. Had she been tricked? Was W.T. Boone even real? Maybe the letters weren't even from a man at all. Maybe it was a cruel joke, a lie sent by someone bored or broken. Or maybe, and somehow, this was the thought that stung the most, maybe he had seen her from a distance, changed his mind, and left without a word. She stared down at her boots, coated in dust from the long journey. She had dressed in her best, the only decent dress she owned, sky blue with tiny white buttons and a lace collar that had once belonged to her mother. She'd worn it with care, brushed her hair in the train's window reflection, practiced her smile. But now she felt like a fool in borrowed lace. A group of cowboys passed by, laughing as they headed toward town. One glanced her way but kept walking. A mother tugged her little boy past Clara, whispering something about strangers, as if Clara might bite. Only the man selling apples gave her a second look. "Need something, miss?" he asked kindly, holding up a bruised apple in a calloused hand. She shook her head, managed a faint "no, thank you," and tried to smile. But it cracked at the edges. The man nodded, tipped his hat, and walked on. Just like the train. Just like every promise she'd ever known. She watched the sky darken with streaks of gold and crimson, and for a moment, the colors took her breath away. Even in this lonely, forgotten corner of the world, the heavens still made something beautiful. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not until she was sure he wasn't coming. Not until every last glimmer of hope had been swallowed by the dusk. She had risked everything for a dream. And dreams, she was starting to learn, often came with a cost. But even as the last train whistle faded into silence, Clara Jensen stayed on that crate, alone, frightened, but not yet broken. She didn't know it, but fate was already galloping toward her, kicking up dust, late but not lost. Because the cowboy who had written those letters was on his way, just not in time for the train. 3 months ago, Clara had found the ad in a newspaper. Lonely rancher seeks kind-hearted woman for marriage. Must be willing to live a simple life. No lies. No games. Just truth and a fresh start. W.T. Boone, Cypress Ridge. Clara had nothing to lose. After her parents passed, she'd been passed between cruel relatives. This ad felt like a lifeline, like someone had thrown her a rope just before she drowned. W.T. Boone had written back. His letters were warm and full of simple dreams. He spoke of sunrises over golden fields, of a small cabin where a woman's laughter could echo again. He said he'd be waiting at the station when she arrived. But now, where was he? 100 questions clawed through her mind. Was she a fool to believe? Did he get cold feet? Was she just another girl to be thrown away? 3 months earlier, Clara Jensen had stumbled upon a crumpled newspaper in the corner of a general store. It had been used to wrap a small bundle of sewing needles, but as she unwrapped it, a single headline caught her eye, not on the front page, but buried in the corner of the classifieds. Lonely rancher seeks kind-hearted woman for marriage. Must be willing to live a simple life. No lies. No games. Just truth and a fresh start. W.T. Boone, Cypress Ridge. The word sat like an anchor in her chest, heavy, unexpected, strangely comforting. She read the ad again. And again. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a promise. A chance. And Clara. Clara had nothing left to lose. Her parents had died of fever 2 winters ago, leaving her orphaned at 20. Since then, she had bounced between bitter aunts and sour-faced cousins, treated more like a burden than blood. She cooked, cleaned, mended socks and scrubbed floors, without thanks, without rest, and certainly without affection. There had been talk of marrying her off to an older widower in town, someone with more cattle than teeth. She overheard it one night through the kitchen door. She's plain, but not ugly. Good enough for a second wife. That night, she cried into her pillow, heart pounding like a trapped bird. But the next morning, she made a decision. She scribbled a letter to the rancher in the ad. Not long after, a reply arrived, neatly folded and smelling faintly of leather and dust. Miss Clara. I was mighty glad to get your letter. You write plain and honest, and I reckon that's rare these days. I live a quiet life, got a few horses, a cabin, and a sky full of stars at night. I won't promise riches, but I'll promise respect. If you want to try at something real, I'll be waiting. Yours sincerely, Will Boone. They began to write weekly. Clara would rush to the post office each time, clutching his latest letter to her chest before even opening it. His words painted vivid pictures. Of sunrises spilling gold over his fields, of coffee brewing in a tin kettle, of the silence that filled his home since his wife had passed. He didn't hide his pain. He spoke of it plainly, like a man who'd seen grief and chose to walk through it instead of around. That honesty, it won her over. And so she saved every penny she earned mending clothes for the neighbors, and bought herself a train ticket west. She packed her few belongings and carried only one picture of her parents, praying they'd be proud of her courage. He'd said he'd be there. He promised to meet her at the station. But now, the platform was empty. The sun dipped lower. Her heart began to sink with it. Was she just another foolish girl chasing letters and dreams? Had he changed his mind? Had she been lied to again? Had she, once more, believed in something that never truly existed? The cowboy with a scarred past. Miles away, a cowboy thundered down the trail, a look of panic on his face. W.T. Boone wasn't the kind of man who broke promises. But that morning, a stubborn steer had broken through the fence, and by the time he got it under control, the train had come and gone. "Damn fool," he muttered to himself. "She's probably thinkin' I left her." Will Boone wasn't a talkative man, but he had poured his whole heart into those letters. After losing his wife and son to sickness 3 winters ago, he'd become a ghost on his own land. The house sat silent. The fields grew wild. He couldn't take it anymore. That's why he wrote Clara. She was the only thing he'd looked forward to in years. He kept her letters in his vest pocket, folded soft from reading them again and again. He kicked the horse faster. "Please still be there," he whispered miles away. With dust rising behind him and sweat clinging to his brow, a cowboy thundered down the trail on a chestnut mare. His jaw was clenched, his hat pulled low, and panic danced in his eyes with every pounding hoofbeat. W.T. Boone wasn't the kind of man to break promises. His word meant everything, even if he didn't speak much of it. But this morning, the world hadn't waited for him. A young steer, wild, ornery, and always causing trouble, had gotten spooked before dawn and busted through the north fence. Will had spent hours chasing the damn thing through gullies and cactus, finally cornering it just as the sun climbed high. By the time he wiped the sweat from his face and looked at the sky, the train had already come and gone. He'd missed her. He gritted his teeth, spurred the mare harder, and cursed under his breath. "Damn fool. She's probably thinkin' I left her." That thought made his stomach twist. He could picture her standing on the platform, suitcase in hand, eyes searching the crowd with hope slowly draining from them. Clara Jensen. He hadn't even seen her face yet, but he'd come to know her better than most people he'd ever met. Her letters were soft and open, like sun-warmed quilts. She wrote of simple joys: hot tea on cold mornings, lilacs blooming in spring, the feel of wind through an open window. There was sadness in her words too, the kind only someone who'd seen loss could carry, and somehow that made them feel like kindred spirits. Will Boone hadn't written to a woman in years. Not since tragedy had carved a hole in his heart that no amount of land, labor, or silence could fill. His wife, Emma, had been the kind of woman who lit up a room without trying. Their son, Charlie, had been just 5 when sickness came sweeping through the valley. Fever took them both in the same cruel week. Will buried them under the cottonwood tree behind the cabin, and after that, the laughter died. Seasons passed in silence. Meals were eaten alone. He spoke to his horse more than any man, and even then, not often. Neighbors stopped checking on him. The house grew still. The fields went wild. But loneliness, true loneliness, has a way of eating a man from the inside. That's why, one night in a moment of aching weakness, he wrote that ad. And when Clara answered, something shifted. She made him believe that maybe, just maybe, there was life after loss. He pulled a folded letter from the pocket of his vest and held it between 2 dusty fingers as he wrote. The edges were frayed. He knew every word by heart. "I don't expect perfection," she had written. "Just kindness. Just honesty. Just someone who wants to build something that lasts." He read it again as the wind whipped past. "Please still be there," he whispered, eyes locked on the horizon. He wasn't just riding to meet a stranger. He was riding toward the first flicker of hope he'd felt in years. The sun was starting to sink. Clara sat in the same spot, though her legs had gone numb. An older couple offered her some bread. A shopkeeper gave her directions to a boarding house. But Clara just shook her head, heart too heavy to speak. She was about to stand, to walk away and figure out what next, when she heard it. Spurs. Boots. Heavy footsteps. She looked up, and there he was. Tall. Dust-covered. Hat in his hand. And eyes full of regret. Miss Clara, he said softly. She blinked in disbelief. Mr. Boone? I'm sorry, he said quickly. Got held up. The damn steer busted loose this morning and I should have come earlier. I don't blame you if you hate me already. Clara just stared, searching his face for truth. And what she saw there wasn't disappointment or deceit, it was a man who'd carried pain. Just like her, the sun was slowly sinking behind the distant hills, casting long, melancholy shadows on the deserted station platform. Clara sat there, still on the same worn wooden crate, her legs numb from hours of waiting in the cool embrace of the twilight. Every fiber of her being ached with the mix of fatigue and heartache, the weight of unfulfilled promises resting heavily upon her shoulders. Around her, time seemed to slow down. An older couple ambled over with a small loaf of bread, offering it to her with gentle, wrinkled smiles. Their kind eyes shone with a quiet empathy, but Clara could only muster a faint shake of her head. Soon, a kindly shopkeeper, whose face had seen too many such lonely evenings, stepped forward to give her directions to a nearby boarding house. Each offering, though filled with compassion, seemed to fade into the dusk, unable to fill the void of abandonment that enveloped her. As the golden hues deepened into dusky pinks and purples, Clara was on the verge of rising from her wooden perch. She hesitated, preparing herself to walk away, to leave behind the ruins of her shattered hopes and figure out a plan for the uncertain miles ahead. It was at that heart-stopping moment, just as she gathered the courage to stand, that a sound cut sharply through the quiet of the evening. It came first as a faint jingle, then crescendoed into a clatter of spurs and heavy, determined footsteps. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Slowly, she lifted her tear-bright eyes to scan the horizon. And there he was, emerging from the twilight like a figure from her dreams and fears all at once. He stood tall, though clearly burdened by the day's trials. His clothes were dust-covered, each clinging to his skin as if trying to tell its own tale of hard riding on unforgiving lands. His hat rested loosely in one calloused hand, as though he'd removed it out of respect, or perhaps regret. But what truly held her captive were his eyes, brimming with a tender, unspoken apology. They were the windows to a soul that had endured too much loss to ever offer half a promise lightly. Miss Clara, he said softly, his voice laced with the humility of a man who understood that trust was not given lightly. For a long, suspended moment, Clara blinked in disbelief. Mr. Boone? Her voice trembled, a mixture of relief and lingering hurt flooding through her. I'm sorry, he managed quickly, the remorse in his tone undeniable. Got held up. The damn steer busted loose this morning and I should have come earlier. I don't blame you if you hate me already. His words tumbled out in a rushed, sincere confession, carrying the weight of a day filled with unforeseen chaos. Clara's eyes searched his face, every weathered line and every shadow born of sorrow, for something that would ground her swirling doubts. What she found wasn't disappointment or deceit, but the unmistakable look of a man who bore unbearable pain on his rugged face. He had known loss, just as she had. In that brief, poignant instant, they shared an unspoken understanding of the loneliness that comes with aching hearts. In the dimming light, with the station now bathed in the silence of twilight, the two stood face to face. A man who had ridden hard against fate's obstacles, and a woman who had waited, yearning for a promise of renewal. Both carried scars that time had etched upon their souls. In that moment, past disappointments began to melt away, replaced by the fragile, renewing glow of hope, and perhaps, the start of something enduring. A new beginning, with no lies between them. That night, he didn't take her straight to the ranch. He walked her to a small diner, bought her the first warm meal she'd had in days, and sat beside her like a man trying to make things right. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. But when they did, it wasn't about dreams or promises, it was about honesty. I'm not rich, Will said, his eyes steady. I got a decent piece of land, 2 horses, and a house that needs some laughter again. I'm not asking you to love me today. Just, give this a chance. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek and gave the tiniest nod. I didn't come for riches, she whispered. I came because your letters felt like home.